Hey guys, it's Jason. In this video I'm going to show you how to configure Amiga Desktop on a Raspberry Pi 3. So for the first part of this you'll want to go to my website. It's hacks.life, that's h4x.life. Just go there in any browser, and on the main page you'll see a link, and I'll also put one in the notes too, for how to get the base Raspbian image set or Raspbian based image setup on a Raspberry Pi for you to continue following this tutorial. So all of that information will be there, and then the actual setup once the software is actually flashed to the SD card will be in this video. If you already know how to flash software to an SD card, if you just download the latest Amibian image, put it on the SD card, you can skip that blog post entirely and just watch the rest of this video. Alright, so if you're seeing this screen, you've successfully burned the ROM image for Amibian onto the SD card and booted it in your Pi via the instructions from blog.i64x.com, which I've linked to down below. You also would have need to prepare a USB thumb drive with some files on it. Those files are downloadable at the link below, and also how to set that drive up with those files is explained at the link below. So if you haven't done those things yet, go do them right now. So this is the Amibian UI. We're going to get out of this first off. So we're going to go to quit, and we're going to have to do some things. So we're going to first expand the image to fill the drive or fill the SD card that we burned this image on. So we're going to type in raspi-config and hit enter. This brings us into Raspi config. We're going to choose the first option to expand the file system. Just hit enter and it'll do it real quick. And then we're going to go down to advanced options, number 9, and we are going to go to memory split, and we're going to change this from 128 to 256 and hit enter. So those are just the expand file system thing is absolutely required, or you're going to run out of space before you can copy all your files over that you'll need to run Amiga OS on this. The second option I've found just helps Amiga OS run a little bit better on the Pi 2 and Pi 3 because they have a full gigabyte of RAM. If you don't have a Pi 2 or Pi 3 and you're trying to do this on an original Pi or a Pi 0 or something, don't make that second change. So when we're done, we're going to click finish or push enter on finish. It'll ask us if we want to reboot. We're going to say yes, and the system will reboot and bring us back to the original UI for Amibian. Alright, now that we're back here, we're going to click quit again, and we're going to push number 4 here and hit enter, and this is going to take us into the Midnight Commander UI. So if you've ever used an FTP client before, this should look familiar. Essentially you've got two File Explorer windows, one on one side, one on the other side. We use this to copy files between two locations. So we're going to use the left side as to access our USB stick. So we're going to if you hit the two ellipses at the top and go all the way to out to root, we're going to click select media. I'm using arrow keys and an enter key on the keyboard, by the way, to do this. There's no mouse support in here. So we're going to select USB, and this will show us the root of our SD card. So if we want to go to the other side, we can click tab, and then we're going to go into this Amiga folder, and everything that we're going to copy to on this side is going to be within this Amiga folder. So I've got some directories on here that you might not have on your stick if you followed my setup instructions. The first one is called Gods. That's just a game that we're going to copy at the end to make sure that our gaming setup actually works. Then system volume information. This is just a directory that Windows creates on every drive it touches, and I made this with a Windows machine, so Windows put that on there. If you're on a Mac, you might see like a .trashes file or a .spotlight file. It tends to create those everywhere. Just ignore temp. That's just something I made with some other files in it. These are the ones that you're going to want, though. These are the important ones. Kickstart 1.3 and Kickstart 3.1 ROM files. We're going to want to copy those first. So if we tab over here, we're going to want to go to the Kickstarts directory and then tab back, and then we're going to push the F5 key on the keyboard to bring up a copy dialog, and then just hit the enter button. So as you can see, if I hit F5 and enter on both of these, it'll move them over there. So then we're going to tab over, and we're going to go into the HDD folder, tab back over, and the system.hdf file we're going to copy to this HDD folder. So we'll hit F5 and then enter. Okay, and then we've got this Workbench, or I'm sorry, Kickstart 34005.A500. So what this is a Kickstarter file for older Amiga 500 games, and we're essentially going to build an Amiga 1200 virtually. So this file is actually required in order to play old Amiga 500 games via the Workbench user interface. And if you don't have this properly installed, the games will error out and they won't launch. So let me tab over to this side and go up a directory. This directory that says floppies is where we're going to put all of our games and things. So this directory we're eventually going to mount as a secondary hard drive in the Amiga OS. So when you launch the desktop, anything you put in this folder you'll be able to get to from the Amiga desktop. So keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this over there. So tab back over, F5 and enter. And then I'm also going to copy this game while we're in here too. So when you do start putting games on your USB drive after you verified everything works and you're copying games over, this /Amiga/floppies directory is where you're going to want to put everything. And that only leaves one more file, which is the Workbench disk image, and we're going to put that in HDD. Even though it's not a hard drive image, we'll just put it in there since it is like a system, we're accessing it like a system file, and it'll be easy to remember when it's in there. So again, F5 and enter to copy that over. And at this point we've got everything copied off of this thing, so we should be good. So if you want to push the F10 key, that will exit. And then we can select the number 3 and hit enter in order to go back into the Amiga UI, or the Amibian UI. So at this point we're going to want to perform the installation of Workbench. So what you're going to want to do is click this A1200 and click load, and that will pre-populate some fields over here. So we're going to go through here a second look. We're going to go to RAM, and you're going to want to crank this up to 8 megabytes of RAM. And then you're going to want to go to hard drives and click add hard file. And we're going to want to browse in, where do we go? Root, Amiga. You actually have to click the word, and it's single click, not double. And then HDD, and then system.hdf. I'm going to click OK, and that you can see it creates Amiga's first hard drive device is DH0, and then there's a link to the file. It's 500 megabytes. Then we're going to go to input, and just for fun on port 1, we're going to hit down, and you're going to see you should see your USB gamepad in here if you have one attached, so we can select that. Make sure your port 0 is still your mouse, and then depending on the game, you might have to come in and mess with this auto fire setting. Some games will allow you to have it, and some games require it be turned off. So if you fire up a game and the buttons are flaky and you don't know what's going on, if you come in here and turn that off, that sometimes fixes it. So next thing we're going to do is go up to ROM, and then our main ROM file, we're going to browse, go up, and then in Kickstarts we're going to select this Kickstart 3.1 ROM. So this is what actually bootstraps the machine to start booting its hard drive file. So once this is done, we can go back to configurations, and we're going to save this as our own custom configuration so we don't have to make these changes every single time. So I'm just going to type in Workbench 3.1 and click save. And then we're going to click start, and that's going to begin the OS installation process. So here's the OS installation process started. We're just going to click enter or hit enter to continue. Another screen wants us to press enter to continue. This is going to ask us if we want to upgrade, it's going to ask us if we want to this is going to ask us to insert the disk for the installer. So at this point we're going to jump back out. So we're going to hit F12. We're going to go to our floppy drives. This should be selected already. This checked, and then this set to a 3.5-inch disk. via the preset settings that we loaded earlier. So we're going to click the ellipsis, go up a level, and then in HDD we're going to select this Workbench 3.1 ADF, which is the installation media for the Workbench 3.1, and then we're just going to click on resume. So now that we have that disk virtually inserted, we can hit the enter key or return key. And this will actually go through and check the version number and verify the disk and everything. So this is going to ask us if we want to do an upgrade of Workbench, which we don't. We want a fresh install, so we're going to say no. Press enter. This install doesn't have any progress bars, so sometimes it looks like it's locked up. If you can move your mouse, it's not locked up. I've installed this several times. This video capture is actually crapped out on me like 4 times now. So I've been through this quite a few times and I haven't yet had it lock up once. So just remember, if it doesn't look like it's doing anything, as long as you can move your mouse, you're probably good to go. Okay, so now it's going to ask us to install some optional things. We don't really need any of these things. So you can read the description if you want. You can install it if you want. Although for what we're doing, it's actually not going to do anything for us. So here, just push enter, and then it'll ask to install or remove. We're just going to say remove. And we basically want to disable anything that we don't absolutely have to use, given the fact that this is being emulated. So the only really safe thing that I've found that doesn't really take any system resources, here if you hit enter you can choose to do a 16 color palette for the UI or a 256 color palette. The 256 looks nicer and it doesn't really slow anything down. So here I choose higher colors. So here you're asked to choose a theme. I've actually done these two. So retro gives you some gross, ugly wallpaper that's really dark, and regen gives you an Amiga checkmark Spectrum wallpaper that doesn't really look that great in 256 colors, although it looks a lot better than the retro wallpaper. So I'm just going to select none here. So if you select none, you're going to get this question, and it basically asks you if you want to use the Workbench 3 icons or the Workbench 1.3 icons. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to choose disable so I can get the newer look icons. For this question, I don't really care about these backgrounds, so I'm just going to say disable. For this one, I'm also going to say disable. Static attack, I'm going to say disable. Anti-click is also disable. And freewheel is also disable. So at this point the installation is complete. We can hit F12 to go back to the UI. We can eject this floppy drive and then click the reset button to reset. When we reset, we should be presented with the Amiga Workbench 3.1 user interface. If we did everything correctly. Alright, so here it is. So here is all of our icons. And everything looks good. So what we need to do now is jump back out and actually map that directory that we put the games in as a hard drive in the UI. So I selected hard drive /CD, and we're going to choose add directory, and then we're going to browse here, go up a level and click floppies. So this should say /root/amiga/floppies. Click OK. OK again. We're going to go up to configurations, select our Workbench 3.1 configuration that we created, and click save, and then reset. So now when we go back to the UI, it should have this created for us on the desktop as a secondary drive, and when we go into that drive we should see our Gods folder, which is our game, and we should also see our Kickstart image for the Amiga 500, which is right there. So now we're going to have to, last setup thing wise, we have to do is copy this Amiga Kickstart 500 image over to the system disk. So we're going to open up System, and then we're going to open up Devs. We're going to open up the Kickstarters drawer, and I'm going to resize this so we can see what's in it. And sometimes you have to right click in here after you resize and do redraw and clean up. And then we're going to open a separate window with our, this is essentially our floppies folder remapped as DH1, so it thinks it's a hard drive, and we're just going to drag and drop this file in here. So as you can see, it's got just a generic icon. We're going to click it to activate it. See how these are like up, and then you click them and they go down. So we're going to click this to activate it, right click, go to Info, go to Protection Bits, and we're going to uncheck everything except for Readable, and click Save. And it's complaining because it's just a generic icon. Should I create one? We're just going to say no. And then we can go ahead and close these. So that will have installed that Kickstarter. If you don't do that step, and I've seen a couple of other videos where people don't do that step, if you launch an A1200 game, it'll work. If you launch a game that was designed for the Amiga 500, it will not work. So you'll get an error 22 or 24, and it'll complain about that file not being there. So at this point, if you want to, you can get rid of this since we don't need it anymore. And then just to test this to make sure it works, we're going to launch our Gods game here. And this is an A1200 game, but we're just going to make sure this works. So these files are actually called, for these games, are actually called, what are they called? WHD load games. So essentially this is the entire game packaged into a directory. So if you look in here, we've got our disk images for the floppy disk this came on, and then we've got some manuals, readmes, some of them like this as solutions, some of them have like walkthroughs in here, players guides and stuff. So this basically is somebody took this game and they packaged it up in such a way that the whole thing can be downloaded all as one file, and they come as zip files, and you unzip them, and then they're a directory with a few files in there. But essentially this is just like a game in a wrapper. So if you want to download games for this and you don't have any, I can't really, due to legal reasons, link to where you get these games. But if you go to Google and you type in WHD load games, there's a few websites that have entire libraries of all of the Amiga 500 games. The reality of it is, a lot of games for the Amiga were developed by independent users that distributed them in European and Asian countries, and a lot of those people gave the games away. A lot more of the games were developed by companies that no longer exist, or who knows who has rights to them. So it's the legality of some of these, especially given the fact that it was more than 25 years ago and a lot of these copyrights have expired. It's a lot more gray than pirating Nintendo ROMs, where Nintendo is still selling them on the eShop and whatnot. So you can either buy these online, and the floppies are in DOS format, so you can make copies of the discs yourselves, or you can go online and get them. Just a short aside to tell you, kind of where to get these games at. But when you go into these directories, there'll be one big image, and if you double click that image, it'll essentially launch the game. So I'm just going to make sure that this game actually launches and starts up correctly, and I'm going to use my gamepad to try to start and play this, just to make sure that our gamepad configuration that we selected is working, and that the game itself is working. Here we go, and it does look like indeed everything works. So not really sure how to play this game or what it's about. I just see it on a lot of the top lists. So there are literally thousands. If you do what I said and Google for the WHD images, there are literally thousands of games out there for the Amiga, and a lot of these games you probably haven't heard of. Some of them, like Lemmings and things, are pretty bog standard, computer games from the day and later. But a lot of them are games that I've never heard of, being that I'm from the U.S. So I would urge you to go on YouTube, as I'm going to do, and try to kind of find some like top games lists, and that'll probably give all of us a better idea as to which games we should be trying to find and play for this thing, given the fact that not a lot of us in the U.S. anyway have much experience with it. So with that, I'm just going to jump back out and kind of give it some final thoughts. Alright, so that's about as easy as it is to get everything set up and running and get you up and playing games. So thanks for watching this, and be sure to check out the rest of the articles on the website. There's some fun hacking stuff on there, and I'll continuously keep it updated. So just come back to this channel if you want to bookmark it or subscribe, or whatever you need to do to get yourself back here, and I'll try to keep the good content coming both on the website and right here on YouTube. Alright, thanks guys. See you later.